I'm Olivia Bailey for the Remembering Benzie project, and can you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Ruth Catton. I live just a couple blocks away from the community house. I was actually born in Benzonia, but I didn't live there very long at that time. But I've had long-time family connections here, and then lived in Manistee during my grade school years, and we would make frequent trips up here because my mother's parents, my grandparents lived here, and a couple of her sisters and their families lived here. So we were always coming up.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you just a few questions to get you warmed up. So, do you have any hobbies?
Sort of. They are gradually dissipating. I liked to sew, I liked to go quilt and do needlework, but my eyesight isn't quite good enough for that anymore. And I like to travel. Right now, during the pandemic, that's curtailed.
Yeah. So what are some of your hobbies or favorite things to do in Benzie County?
Well, I used to do cross-country skiing, and I used to swim quite a bit. Not that I was very good at it, but I enjoyed going in the lake. The cross-country skiing changed to snowshoeing after I've had joint transplants. And the orthopod said, no more. But I enjoy just going around and seeing things and reminiscing. I've friends of the library. I like reading. I'm on the Mills Community House Board. I was on the Historical Society board and did things over there. Genealogy is a big hobby.
Can you tell me more about that, the genealogy?
Well, tracing back ancestors on both sides of the family, and whole families, not just my mother, my mother's mother, my mother's mother's mother, and so on, but their siblings and the history of where they came from. And in my travels, I've gotten to England quite a bit, and both families way back came from England, and so I searched out the places where they were.
Okay, so you mentioned that you grew up in, you were born in Benzie and you grew up in Manistee.
Yes.
Were there any other places you grew up in?
Well, then I was in Manistee. We were there until January of 1942. And then we moved to St. John's, Michigan, and that's where I went to high school. And then after that, it was college.
So what was it like moving around, like a lot as a child?
Well, very supportive family, so it was kind of fun. Was most, well, I hated leaving Manistee, but I knew we had to, because I'd been with those schoolmates for quite a number of years and was going to miss them. But that was when World War II came along, and my dad was a pastor, minister of the Congregational Church, and he got a new call to the church in St. John, so we went along. And soon got acquainted down there. And then he went into the Navy during World War II as a chaplain. And so we moved out of the parsonage and into an apartment and did schooling from there. And then after the war, when he got out, he could, by law, have insisted on going back to the church in St. John's, but he didn't think that was fair to the minister that had come while he was away. So he searched around and we moved to Decatur, Illinois.
So how did you adjust moving to new places?
Made out okay. As I say, the family was very supportive, and we knew ahead of time that we were going to have to move, and figured it was going to have to make new playmates, new acquaintances.
What did you do for fun growing up?
We did a lot of playing out of doors. In Manistee, there was a big empty lot behind us where we played softball. And then also we could go skiing in the ravines in the sand hills, sand dunes, do that in the wintertime. Not the kind of skiing you do nowadays. They were plain wooden boards with the curl on the end and a strap over your foot. But that was a lot of fun. I joined the Girl Scouts when I was there. Then when we moved to St. John's, there wasn't a Girl Scout troop. We tried to get one started, but because of World War II, we couldn't find anybody to be a leader, so that we gave up on that. So
how did your childhood life change once World War II started?
Well, a lot of things we did in school were pertaining to the war. If there was a school dance or something that required admission, so many flattened tin cans would gain you admission, or a pound of lard, or something like that to further the war effort. And then also, of course, we were on rations. We had coupon books that to get various foodstuffs, the meat and the butter and milk and all. You had to have so many ration coupons. It cut down on the driving my mother could do, because when Dad was home, you could have a B or a C card, but when the men were away, we just had an A card, which was a very limited amount of gas. In summers, we came and stayed at my grandparents' cottage out on the North Shore, and I worked, and my younger brother did a little. He was 6 years younger than me. Worked in my Uncle Dayton's cherry orchard during the summer.
So what was your family like growing up?
Well, there were three of us. My older brother, 3.5 years older than me, myself, and my younger brother, who was nearly 6 years younger than me. And we did a lot. The family did a lot of things together. But we did have friends from school that we also played with. And as I say, we had a field behind the house. It was Manistee, of course, is bigger than Benzonia, but there was a lot of open space where we were living. And then my Uncle Bruce and Aunt Hazel and their son Bill, he would get a cottage somewhere, either on Crystal Lake, or one time it was down at Orchard Beach in Manistee. And then we children had turns to go and stay with them and play with our cousin Bill.
So you mentioned that your father was a pastor and he was in the Navy. Was there anybody else that raised you? Did you have a mother?
Well, mother, yes, she was home the whole time. Although when he was home and being a pastor in a church, she did a lot of the things in the church with him. In a sense, she didn't do any of the preaching, but worked with the Women's Fellowship, worked in the Sunday school and all.
What were your siblings' names and what were their occupations?
Well, my older brother was William Robert Catton Jr., Bill, and he had to be Bill Bob because my cousin Bill was William Bruce Catton, so it was Bill Bob and Bill Bruce would play together. And then my younger brother was Edward Bruce Catton, and well, my older brother, when he got out of the Navy in World War II, we were in college together. In high school, he'd been 3 years ahead of me. In college, I graduated a semester ahead of him because I got in before he got out of the Navy. He became a professor of sociology. My younger brother, well, he was very much interested in drama and and also music. When he was drafted in the Army, he was stationed in Hawaii for a long time, and while he was out there, he directed a company chorus. And then when he came home, he was local choir director here for a long time until he retired. But his job that gave him money was he worked up at Interlaken on the radio station there. He was one of the early announcers when they started the station. And he became music director or collected the various music for them, did a lot of online announcing and choosing of music, and he was the one that started the Saturday morning record request program.
Did you have any pets growing up?
We had a brown and white spaniel. Technically, he was Edward's dog, but he was the family dog. And unfortunately, when we had to move into an apartment during the war, we could no longer keep the dog. So we gave him to my Uncle Dayton up here, and then eventually he was given to somebody down in Beulah. And we could see him up here now and then, but Spot, very imaginative name.
What was school like when you were growing up?
Oh, in what way?
I guess just...
we didn't have computers then.
Did you have any friends in school?
Oh yeah. And because of our moving around, and because my family was a family of readers, both my older brother and I skipped some grades. I mean, we would I was in the second grade in Manistee, and we moved to St. John's, and they decided that I was ready for third grade, and so I moved on up. And then when we moved after the war, I was in my senior year in high school. I completed the first semester of the senior year, and we moved to Decatur, Illinois, where it was a big city high school with several hundred in the class. And we discovered that I had enough credits to graduate, and the local university, James Millikan University, would accept my credit transfer without actually having a high school diploma. So I skipped another year there.
Did you have any memorable teachers?
In some ways. I remember one teacher was emphasizing something and pounding his fist on the table, and unfortunately, somebody's just coming to the front door. You know these things with the spike on that you put papers on? Anyway, he came down on that with his fist. That ended that class for the day. But, and there was one teacher, I never got involved, but a matter of discipline was putting somebody in a closet which had no windows, nothing but the door to get into it. And then I had others that I very much enjoyed. In high school, the one that eventually became our class sponsor was a physics teacher, and physics and chemistry. I enjoyed him very much, but one day I was showing my younger brother around the school, and we met Mr. Pocius, and he had Bill, my older brother, in one class, and he said, well, to Edward, are you going to be as good at physics as your brother? I was in his physics class at the time. I didn't appreciate that comparison, but we got along.
So you mentioned you attended college. What was the name of that?
Well, I started at James Millikan University, and that's spelled K-I-N, not like former Governor Millikan, that was E-N. And that was in Decatur, and I did the one semester and then summer school, and then Bill and I together did a full year, and then we both transferred to Oberlin College in Ohio. And Oberlin is where I graduated.
Why did you decide to go to college?
I just always assumed I would. And fortunately, I succeeded in getting good enough grades to go. And it was, well, Millikan wasn't so hard financially because I lived at home, and they had an automatic scholarship for preacher's kids. And then Oberlin, I got a father's scholarship because my dad had gone to Oberlin way back when. And also had a board job. I did things that helped pay the room and board. And college expenses weren't as high then as they are now.
What did you study?
Pre-med. When I started at Millikan, I was thinking of pre-nursing. At that point, they didn't have that, and the advisor, well, why don't you take pre-med? So I did, and it worked. Although when I finished at Oberlin, there was no way under the sun that we were going to be able to afford to send me to medical school. But we had a women's career conference that senior year, and I found out about physical therapy, and I could get a scholarship through the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, the March of Dimes. And so that's what I did. And the doctors there heard that I'd been pre-med and that I'd been interested in going to medical school, so they encouraged me to go on. And I think it was their recommendation that got me in.
I think you mentioned, or Mrs. Oh gosh. I'm always forgetting names. Anyways, she mentioned that you became a surgeon?
No, I actually pediatrician.
Okay.
But overseas, I was virtually doing general practice, which involved some surgery.
Okay.
And one of the times that I was home on home assignment, I did a surgical residency down in Grand Rapids at Butterworth Hospital. But
how did you decide to become a pediatrician?
it was just that I did a rotating internship after medical school, and between what I'd had in medical school and that, I found that I liked working with kids the best.
Were you part of any clubs or organizations in college?
I was briefly part of a sorority at Millikan, and I think I was in the German club in Oberlin, and musical union, which was singing.
Did you have any memorable professors?
Yes, there was Dr. Reichard was my, well, in Millikan it was Fräulein Ross. Fräulein. And then in Oberlin it was Professor Reichard and George Walker in zoology and Hope Hibbard in zoology, comparative anatomy in there.
What made them so memorable?
Well, they were good teachers, and they were friendly. You didn't feel scared of them or anything.
So what did you do after college?
Well, that's when I went on to physical therapy. And this was at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And ours was the first class. It was a one-year course after either college or RN. And ours was the first class that then was required to work a year after our training year at Mayo's. And it was then that they encouraged me to go on to medical school. And working at a staff salary, I was able to save my first year's tuition at medical school, which helped out.
So I believe you went overseas to India?
Yes.
So why did you move to India?
Well, when I was finishing up my pediatric residency training, I didn't know what I was going to do. A lot of specialists would go into a suburban or a big city practice, and neither of those things appealed to me, didn't feel right for me. And my father happened to go to Boston, where the mission board offices for our church, the Congregational Church, were there, and he went in and he found a pamphlet that said overseas opportunities, and he sent it to me and he said, "Had you ever thought of anything like this?" And reading through it, they were specifically requesting, wanted somebody to be a woman physician for India, and that sounded very interesting. And I was out in Seattle at that time in my pediatric training, and I went to the church library there and read up on our particular missions in India, and proceeded to apply, and was accepted, and the rest is history, as they say.
So what year did you move, and how long did you live there?
What year did I move to India?
Yeah.
Oh, in 1958. And then I was home for a time. I had a shipboard romance, and I moved to Australia thinking I was going to get married, but it eventually didn't, and came back to the States and did a year further training out in Seattle. And then it would have been about 63 that I went back to India. And we would periodically have home assignments in which we would come home. Any health problems could be taken care of. Go around speaking to the churches and telling them what their mission dollars were doing, and do any further education. And so periodically I would get back to the States. But I eventually retired in 1993. And that was when I moved full-time up here again.
Okay. So what does your family think about your move to India?
Well, after my father sent this pamphlet, further, a week or so later, he wrote and he said, if you decide to do this, don't think it's because your mother and I think that's what you should do. We'll back you up, we'll be proud of you, but it's got to be your decision. It's got to be something that feels right to you. So they backed me up all the time. And Mother used to make copies of things from my letters that she would then present at Women's Fellowship or other places around. And they were proud of me, they said. My older brother thought the sociologist thought I was going out and make the population problem worse. He's the one that had 4 children.
So what was it like adjusting to India and the culture?
Very interesting, but the fact that I had moved around in the United States quite a bit and adjusted to different places here helped. And then also I was expecting it to be different and interesting. And it was a heck of a lot hotter, and of course we never had anything like this. We did sometimes have some hailstorms, but I started in South India and subsequently moved up to Central India. So it would get chilly in Central India, down in the 40s, but nothing like this. And hot in the summer, and neither my apartment nor my so-called bungalow had air conditioning. We had overhead fans, and that was the extent of it.
So what kind of facility did you work in India?
Well, there were hospital buildings, and the one in South India was somewhat larger, but as much open air as possible. No air conditioning in either one. Some of the places now do have some air-conditioned rooms, but we didn't when I was there. We did have our own running water systems, our own pumps into the wells, and we did have electricity. In Central India particularly, it would frequently have outages. So I was talking about that one time when I was home and giving a talk at the church here, and afterwards they say, what can we do about it? And they raised the money that we got our own hospital generator, and so that we could have electricity even when the current went out. No telephone. They only got telephones in the last few months before I left, because there hadn't even been any television. That came too just before I left, but no telephone line along the road. It was across the fields along a rail line.
So how is working in the medical field in India different compared to the United States?
Well, in the cities, it would be very much similar to the United States, but in the places where I was, we didn't have as many facilities, and we did see a lot of the same diseases, but we also saw some that you wouldn't see here. I saw some leprosy patients. I did see one in Chicago when I was there. They called us to see him. It was an inpatient at Cook County Hospital, and so we all got to see the leprosy patient. I saw rabies, unfortunately, tetanus. I had seen a tetanus child as an intern, so I was familiar with it and knew lockjaw, and managed to save some of the tetanus patients. Smallpox I saw at two of the hospitals, but it was being stamped out because of vaccination. Have you had your?
Yeah.
But then a lot of the same things that you see here.
What did you like most about India?
Well, the people I worked with were very friendly, and I liked the fact that I could make a difference there with people. And it was just interesting to see the different culture and the different landscape. And their civilization goes back a heck of a lot longer than ours does.
Yeah. Okay. What did you like the least about India?
Well, sometimes the heat and dust. And you didn't really have a lot of privacy, even if you were, when we would drive from one place to another and would stop at the side of the road to have a meal, you'd think that it was out in the middle of nowhere, but very soon people would be around looking at you. What are these strange creatures doing?
So you mentioned that you really like to make a difference in India. Can you give me a few examples of what you mean by that?
Well, that I could bring semi-modern medicine to a lot of villagers that wouldn't have had that help before. One of the things we were doing was family planning, and part of it was the operations to so that either the man or the woman would not have any more children. And there was one woman, the mothers would come and stay with the children when they were admitted for anything. And her one child, I think he was number 15, was in. And she was highly pregnant at that point and went into labor and delivered number 16. And we took care of her, and we did do the operation on her, getting both her permission and her husband's permission. And afterwards, she said, "Why didn't I know about this before?" And I wasn't sure whether it was limiting family or just having somebody take care of her. But at any rate, we did that. Out of at least 16 or 17 children, she had equal number of boys and girls, but only nine left after this new baby. That there was a high mortality, and that was one of the things we could do, was reduce the mortality rate so that the women didn't have to have so many children. Their children were their life insurance. The children would work and support them in their old age, whatever it would be, extend to.
What were your friends like in India?
Well, I was friends with a number of the Indians, and then there was a Scottish nurse at a sister hospital about 30 miles away that would not be equivalent to from here to Traverse. The roads were not that good, and the traffic was different. But it was good, and then there were some nurses at the hospital on the other side, 30 miles away, and friends with them. We didn't always get together all that often, but just knowing that you had a colleague there, and that if you had any problems or complaints, you weren't going to be complaining to your Indian friends who might be upset about that, but you, a colleague that would know what you're talking about and sympathize.
Are you still in contact with any of your friends and colleagues?
I had a email the other day from my Oberlin College roommate. But my college classmates are getting pretty up in age too. As a matter of fact, because of my skipping grades and so on, I was generally the youngest person in the class.
Could you tell me about your most memorable experience in India?
Well, my junior doctor was on call this weekend, and he sent over a message that a woman had come in for delivery, and it was going to be a breech delivery, and 4 feet were showing, which meant, and I had seen the woman the week or so before in outpatient and had diagnosed that she had twins. So he said, "What do I do?" So I went over to see if we could push one up and get the other one down, but no, so we had to do a C-section, and it turned out they were Siamese twins joined here, and we weren't able to save the children, the babes, but we did save the mother, and this was my final year there. And I understand that the following year she came in and delivered successfully a live baby, so that my job in work in doing the cesarean section for her and getting those twins out, and then getting her put back together was successful, although I wasn't able to save the twins. So that was very memorable. Another one was a young boy. He must have been 10 or 12, and he came in one night, and he knew he had rabies, but the bite that had caused it had been nearly a year before. So we hoped that he was wrong and that he was just scared that it was rabies, but unfortunately it proved to be rabies, and we weren't able to save him.
So why did you decide to leave India?
Well, I excuse me, was getting old. I had reached retirement age, and it was time to let my doctor have her say in the hospital that it was her turn to take over. And this was an Indian doctor that had worked with me quite a number of years, and I had delivered a couple of her babies, and she had gone for OBGYN training while she was a member of the staff, and then had come back. And so she took over from me. But I was tolerating the heat pretty well up until the last couple of years, and then it was getting pretty hard. And so it was time.
So where did you move to?
Back here.
Why did you decide to move back to Benzie County?
Well, I liked it here. My mother was still, no, she wasn't still living. My brother and I inherited my younger brother and I inherited the house that they had retired to, my folks. And I had used it as a base on several of these short-term returns. And I enjoy a change in weather. People kept telling me I should get on the list for our retirement village out in Claremont, California, and I didn't want to move to California. And when I first moved back here, I was able to be very active in the wintertime, as I say, cross-country skiing or snowshoeing and so on. And but I liked the church here, and I liked the people here, so.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about your family history. So how long has your family lived in Benzie County?
Well, my father's family moved. Dad was born in Cadillac when grandfather was a principal over there, and then he had been serving part-time here at the academy, and then was called to be the principal of the academy. So in the 1890s was when the Catton family moved here, and for a time this house up on the hills right over here, after the principal's family lived in this building. It was a girls' dormitory. And that room next door, called the Catton room, became the bedroom for my father and his younger brother Bruce. And it's called the Catton room after my father. My mother would be very insistent on that. But so they lived, Cattons lived here since the 1890s. The Willards, my mother's family, came up summers in the early 1900s, and they built a cottage out on the North Shore in an area called Glen Eyrie. And so the grandmother and the children would come up and stay every summer, and grandfather would come up from, he was a physician, he was a doctor, he delivered me. He would come up periodically, and so it was up here in Benzonia in the church over there that my parents met as young people. My father dated mother's next younger sister for a time, and my brothers and I are eternally grateful that it was mother he chose rather than Aunt Bobby. But at any rate, so the Willards had a connection from 1905 or so up here, and my grandparents moved full time in the 1920 something. And when grandfather, he retired a little bit early from his practice down in Oak Park, and so then they lived here continuously. They lived in the White House up there called Grace Cottage.
What kind of jobs did your grandparents or some of your other family members do when they moved up here?
Well, as I say, Grandfather Catton was the next to the last principal of the academy, which was here. Grandmother Catton, his wife, his third wife, taught, I think, music and English. So she taught in the academy. After he died, she eventually went to Carleton College, first as a house mother of one of the dormitories, and then she became Dean of Women there. So Grandfather Willard, although he had retired from his practice in Oak Park, he did treat patients up here, and for a long time I didn't realize that he was retired, that he was so active. He had an office in the house there, and at one point I think he was mayor of the village, and he was very active in village affairs. Grandmother Catton, grandmother Willard, was virtually mostly just a housewife. She was a housewife and backed him up and so on.
So what impacts have your family left in Benzie County over the years?
Well, there's this place here, and Dad, I think, was one of the favorite pastors over there. My younger brother was the voice of Interlaken for many years. Mother's younger brother, Dayton Willard, had an orchard and a turkey farm out on the north shore of Crystal Lake, and he was very involved in Beulah Village politics. And when he died, they said, Mr. Benzie County has passed away. So most of you nowadays, they died before you were aware of any of them, but
are there any historical events in Benzie County that your family was involved in?
Such as?
I don't know. If you can't remember anything or don't,
Well,
it's okay.
Well, Uncle Bruce was very involved in Civil War things, and he used to hear stories of the Civil War from the veterans that were still alive when he was growing up as a boy. We used to have, when the church was the building which is now the museum, they had all this land here, and where the parking lot now is, I remember there was a large cement slab, and we would have outdoor services there frequently.
So, you mentioned your uncle, Ruth Catton. He was the famous Civil War author. I mean, the room
Yep.
is named after him, yeah.
No. Oh, this room,
Here?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the Michigan room. The Catton room is named after my father. Although he and Bruce roomed there together, but...
Okay. So were you close with your uncle at all?
Yeah, I enjoyed him and his wife Hazel and Bill Bruce. We were virtually Bill Bruce's only cousins. We did have one other, Davis, but he was quite a bit younger than us and never lived. Initially was born in Chicago and eventually lived in Detroit. And we didn't get together with him very often. But yes, we liked to visit with Uncle Bruce in the summer when he was up here. And I visited sometimes with him down in the Washington, D.C. area. He was there during World War II. He was in one of the federal organizations there. And when we went, Mom and Edward and I went down to Norfolk when my father's ship he put in after its shakedown cruise and before it was heading out to the Pacific. And my older brother was stationed at Norfolk then. And after we saw Dad's ship go off, then we went up to Washington and stayed with that family. And that was early May, so on Mother's Day, Bill hitchhiked up from... That was done a lot in those days, with hitchhiking.
Yeah.
Up on Mother's Day to Washington. Bill Bruce was very amused to see a police car pull up outside and let this sailor out. It was a police car. It was his last ride. And but we enjoyed staying with Uncle Bruce. And then he eventually had a place up overlooking the South Shore and across Crystal Lake. Let me see. Oh, there's a road out there, Glory Road. That was named after one of his books, was Glory Road. And that was, his drive was off of that, and then up on the hillside and looking across the lake. And we liked to visit with him up there.
So how did your uncle's life and career impact you and the rest of your family?
Well, he was always just Uncle Bruce to us. We enjoyed him. We enjoyed talking with him. My father and he would discuss the events of the Civil War, and my father would hold his own with him. He wasn't overshadowed by Bruce's knowledge of it. And incidentally, here, when I was looking around at home, I came across a videotape that was made of a program that we had over at the museum about, it's down in there someplace, there. And evening Remembering Ruth Catton, Benzie Historical Museum. This was back in the year 2000. And Edward was pretty much portraying and speaking for Bruce, and then they were asking questions and so on. And then he got a copy of that.
So, how has Benzie County changed since you were a child?
There is more population. The biggest change is the build up around Crystal Lake, mm-hmm. and all the new cottages there. And there are certain more regulations that have needed to be put in place that we didn't have when we were little. Either we didn't have them or we didn't know about them as kids. And growing up early, there wasn't even one stoplight in Benzie County.
Could you tell me about your most memorable experience as a kid in Benzie County?
Well, it might have been the summer that we had a sort of a church camp, and it's, at that point, the Mills Community House belonged to the church, and the girls were housed upstairs and somewhere downstairs. I don't know whether it was this floor or the basement that the boys were. And we had some a speaker, a Greek, Reverend Nikolaides, that I remember was very, very interesting and very inspirational.
So what kind of things were inspirational about him? And
Well, just his talking about his life, and then how he became a minister and all, and
so now I'm going to talk about some volunteer work in Benzie County. So you mentioned that you were involved with like the Mills Community Board and First Congregational Church. So how did you get involved with volunteering and being involved in Benzie County?
well, I was living here, and they were searching for new members of the board, and I've always been I've been a member of the church over there for a long time, and that this was one of the things to do. A friend or shirt tail cousin got me involved with the Friends of the Benzonia Library, and I had planned, and I did get my card here, and an easy walk over. Except anymore, I don't like crossing 31. But at any rate, and then Historical Society I got involved with.
We'll wait for that to pass. Wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
So
And I got involved with the genealogy program over at the Historic Society too, and entering things on the computer program in genealogy. And then we started a genealogy society here, BAGS, Benzonia Area Genealogical Society, and I've been a member of that since the beginning.
So what kind of work have you accomplished with BAGS or the Historical Society or any organizations that you have worked with?
What was the first part of the question?
What kind of work have you accomplished?
Well, we entered a lot of information on the computer program, the family tree program, on it of various families in the area, and then their descendants can write and get a printout of some of that information if they want, and there's a lot of information over there about early settlers here, early pioneers. And our the society we have, except for the year 2000, we've been having monthly meetings starting in April, from April until November, in which we have a speaker come in and give information of how to do searches and how to various genealogical topics. But we had to cancel the 2020 season. We had some good speakers lined up too.
So what do you like most about genealogy?
It's just interesting to me to go back and find out about, and it's not just dates, names and dates, but what they did, and a lot of the stuff you've been asking me. Find out about my ancestors and their relatives. My great-grandmother, my grandmother Willard's mother, was a teacher back in the 1880s and 1890s. She was widowed. Her husband died 2 days before my grandmother was born. So great-grandmother Carpenter raised that girl, taught school. She later took care of her widowed mother, and she became guardian of her brother who attempted suicide. And that was back when women weren't liberated. In fact, great-grandmother, got a picture of her down there, taught in a school in Chicago. She moved from a small town in Wisconsin down there. She taught in Chicago, became principal of a school down there, while, as I say, raising her one child and looking after her widowed mother.
So you mentioned that you've always been involved with the First Congregational Church.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of volunteer work do you do there, if any?
Well, sing in the choir when we can have a choir. And then for a long time I was treasurer of the Women's Fellowship.
Can you tell me more about what you did with the Women's Fellowship?
Well, as I say, I was treasurer, and I still attend the meetings, and well, we did get together and work on one of the projects, making blankets for seniors or others. I helped organize twice a sale. There's a place that you can get items, books, jewelry, clothing, tote bags that are made by organizations overseas, and have a sale, and part of the money goes back to the organization that has made these, and part stays in the treasury of the Women's Fellowship. At any rate, I helped organize two of those sales. Generally, when we have our cookie walk in December, I generally make up a bunch of cookies to sell at that.
What do you like most about volunteering?
Just the factor that I can do something to help. I creak too much now to do much of it, but
and what is difficult about volunteering?
Well, right now for me it would be the physical difficulties, but you have to be in a group that is congenial with each other, that and not try to hope that no one person dominates and disagrees with you, that you disagree with. But that's life. That's what you run into any place.
Does your volunteer work relate to your work in the medical field?
I haven't been able to do any of that. I'm no longer, my license lapsed. I used to be licensed in the state of Michigan and the state of Washington, but medical practice now in the United States is so different from what I was able to do overseas that I didn't even consider trying to get relicensed. If I hadn't been so out of it, I would have been tempted to volunteer to help in the pandemic, but I would, as at my age and lack of recent activities, been more of a liability than a help, which I was sorry that I couldn't do, but I can encourage people to get vaccinated. I can encourage people to wear their masks and so on, but
and is there any ways that your volunteer work relates to how you were mentioning that you wanted to help people, like in India? Is that kind of the same thing with volunteering?
well, things we do through the Women's Fellowship often is active, and collecting for bacon, a lot of, anytime I donate money, it's for something that will, like UNICEF and CARE, Habitat for Humanity. That was just a little red car.
Yeah.
I was home from India and down in my house there on Walker Street the night that the museum burned. I could hear and see, I have an upstairs bedroom, and I could hear and see the flames and the people talking and so on from my room. And I was tempted to go over and see what was going on. I thought it was one of the houses on the corner over there, only found out in the morning that it was the museum. My brother, younger brother, who had the bedroom downstairs, he didn't hear a thing. And I couldn't understand, but now I do spend a lot of time in that room downstairs, and it's almost soundproof from anything else in the house and from anything outside. But I went over and helped carry things out from the burned part and lay them on the ground and dry them out. Most of the damage of the artifacts was from the either smoke or the water from the hoses, and but we were able to save an awful lot of what was in there.
So back to talking about some of the volunteering. Was there anything, like person or something, that inspired you to be an active part in your community?
Well, my mother was always active in the church, and then, as I say, my grandfather was very active in the community, and it was just sort of the thing to do. I wasn't about to come home and just sit at home, and I could get a lot of reading in, but I could do that at any rate. And that although I was no longer felt I was physically able to stay out in India because of the heat and how it was beginning to affect me, was still very active physically, and had to do something.
How are charities and community organizations different now than when you were growing up?
Well, I wasn't so aware of them when I was growing up. I used to sell Girl Scout cookies.
Are there any other organizations that you're involved in that you haven't talked about?
I'm a member of one of the chapters of PEO up here, and that's to encourages education for girls and women, and we through the organization, we provide scholarships for girls. Before the Gulf War, we lined up along 31 here protesting, trying to keep us from going into it. Didn't work, but it was a very peaceful protest. So I did some of that. When McDonald's was threatening to come in up here by the property right up here by the stoplight, I went door to door canvassing and trying to get signatures for a petition to keep them out. Didn't think this was the place up here on the, well, it was going to be right close to the elementary school over there. And not a good place traffic-wise. So eventually they moved down there, and yeah, that's something that changed, is all the stores and build up down there. That's different than when I was here. There was a grocery store up here in Benzonia, Maddox grocery store, and it's now a resale shop in there, next to the Cherry Hut building. And across the street where there's the post office parking lot was the Case's filling station. And he had a small lot there for used for cars instead of that big lot down there.
I realize that you mentioned a lot that you're involved with women in the community. Is there any reason that you're so involved with women? Or?
Well, it's I joined the PEO because of their interest in women's education, and it's a organization. They have to ask if you want to join. You don't go around saying, "Can I join?" But I knew some people that were in it, and they knew that I was interested in the same things.
How has the COVID pandemic impacted your volunteer work?
Pretty much put a stop to it, except what you can do either on telephone or PEO. We can now have Zoom meetings. And I even have, I was doing a movement and balance class at the fitness center over there. Of course, that's closed down. Well, now the lady that had been in charge of that is doing once a week, one on Zoom, and so I'm learning more and more about the computer. I'm darned if I'm going to be one of these people, "Oh, she's so old, she doesn't know these things." There's a lot I don't know, but I'm gradually learning.
Yeah. How has the pandemic affected some of the organizations that you've worked with?
Well, they've had to change the way they do meetings, the way they do fundraising, and that our board of directors here is small enough that we could do social distancing downstairs where we meet, but then it's a problem of sanitizing and cleaning up all the time, and so we do a lot of work online now. Both the meetings and any things that have to be voted on, we can do email votes on.
How do you see yourself participating in your community going forward?
Less and less because of physical changes, but I'll get out as much as I can, and I do envisage within probably the next year of having to give up driving because I've also developing macular degeneration.
How do you think you and others can help more people become involved in the community?
By sharing with them what the community needs are, and sharing in conversation and in education, and what a joy it is to be able to help somebody.
So what are your hopes and dreams for the future of Benzie County?
Well, that it will remain a community that looks after each other. I have a very good friend down in Ludington, and she has a lot of problems there because they don't look after each other. And she's so envious of way I have neighbors that come without question to come and shovel and do things for me. Early on in the pandemic, a neighbor would do my grocery shopping till I figured, heck, I can still get out there and do that. And also, it was too hard to make up a list that was non-specific enough that she could. I make my list frozen dinners. Okay, how's she going to know which ones to get? And unfortunately, this last list had munchies on it. That's been one of the problems of the pandemic, is less exercise and more eating.
Yeah. So are there any hopes and dreams that you have for Benzie County?
Well, as I say, to continue being a community that looks out for each other, that things like bacon, things like Habitat for Humanity, that it helps those in need, and also to continue the factor of that it's a educated community. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have gone to college. That it can be a technical education, but it encourage people to read. That's one of the reasons that I'm glad to be a part of the library, Friends of Benzonia Public Library. That reading is as good or better than video games. That you can learn a lot about, visit outside. I traveled to India. I've visited every continent there is in the world. And not everybody can do that. I've been very fortunate. But they can visit through books.
Okay, so that was my last question, but is there anything we haven't discussed that you would like to talk about?
I don't think so. I told you a little bit about the family background on both sides. I think a couple of the snapshots I have is the ceremony when the community house was turned over to the community house board and from the church who had run it before.
Is there anything else, or?
No, don't think so.
Okay.
I'll probably think of a dozen things when I get home, but.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
How did you get into this?
Well, I do like online school, so I didn't really hear about it until like somebody quit and there was an opening.
Aha.
And so one of the other interns asked around if there was anybody that was interested, and I was like, this seems kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So being able to interview like people in the community and share their stories, I think that's super interesting. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
What year school are you?
I'm a junior, so I'll graduate in 2022.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I go to Benzie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I started school at the old grade school, which is no longer there, but you know where it was.
Yeah.
Because we were back, we were here for a few months before moving to Manistee.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any questions about the Remembering Benzie project?
No, I learned a bit about it through the Friends of the Benzonia Public Library.
Okay.
But this is its second year, is it?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's all I've got. Is there anything else or any more questions?
I don't think so.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.